Hey, I'm Pastor Derek. I'm coming to you from Hillsboro First United Methodist Church for our daily video. And I am so glad that you are tuning in to join us here. I've been sharing about small groups and more specifically what we're calling new room bands here at Hillsboro First. Band being defined as not like a rock band on a stage, but a small group of people who are banding together to become holy as God is holy. John Wesley talked about this. He said that there is no holiness apart from social holiness. And again, what he meant is that we need one another. We need one another to climb on that upward way to God. I've just been taking the opportunity week after week to tell you a little bit more about our band groups. And my hope is that I'll stick with this long enough so that you just get tired and sick of hearing about it and you actually join a band yourself and find out for yourself. But in the meantime, I do want to share what I think is some just really good stuff about band meetings. And today I want to tell you about two men from early Methodism. And the first is George Whitefield. George Whitefield was a contemporary of John and Charles Wesley. He was their friend. He was, like them, a preacher, an outdoor preacher. Wesley was doing some outdoor preaching, revivals, that kind of thing, and Whitefield really caught onto that as well. He was known as a powerful revival preacher. He was a celebrity, and this kind of sounds funny to me as well as to you probably, but back in the day, preachers were celebrities. The best orators of the day were the celebrities. So maybe there's still hope for me to become a celebrity, but probably not. Anyways, George Whitefield was a very well-known guy in England. The modern approximation is that he gave over 18,000 sermons during his life. It's been said that he preached more hours a day than he slept, which would be hard for me to do, hard for any of us to do. It's also estimated that more than 10 million people heard his message, and that his voice was so powerful that you could hear his preaching clearly from 2 miles away. Again, that was without things like this microphone or any kind of modern amplification. You could hear him when he preached because he preached in such a strong voice. Now, in 1770, at the age of 55, he said, "I had rather wear out than rust out." He lived that way. He was going to wear himself out. And that became a self-fulfilling prophecy the very next day. He was preaching, and we think he had some kind of heart attack or something after he preached, and he wore out. He passed away. And what happened after that to the Whitefield revivals, the revivals that he had been preaching, they died out. As he died out, the revivals died out. Now, the second person I want to tell you about is Francis Asbury. Now, unlike George Whitefield, who was on an even keel as far as being a contemporary of John and Charles Wesley, same kind of age, same generation, Francis Asbury would have been a young man, a very young man compared to John and Charles Wesley. He was about 22 when he was sent over to America to take charge of the work in America, the spreading of Methodism. And during the American Revolutionary War, he was one of two Methodists that would not return to England. They insisted on staying here in America. Francis Asbury was basically the father of American Methodism. He traveled a lot, just like the Wesley brothers and just like George Whitefield, 130,000 miles on horseback. He crossed the Allegheny Mountains at least 6 times during his lifetime. People say that he rose around 4 a.m. every day, and that was because he prayed for a couple hours before he did anything else. He preached more than 10,000 sermons, so not quite as many as George Whitefield, but still certainly a lot. And he was launching the Methodist movement here so that in about 50 years' time, the Methodists went from only a few hundred people to over 6 million people. Let me state that again. In 50 years, the Methodists went from only a few hundred people here in America to over 6 million people in America. Now, with George Whitefield, when he died, it died out with him. With Francis Asbury, he was doing the same kind of work, preaching and teaching, and it went from a few hundred to 6 million. What was the difference? What was the difference? What was the secret sauce? And the secret sauce was this. Francis Asbury was using John Wesley's discipleship strategy of gathering people in accountable kinds of relationships. They had 3 different kinds of sizes of gatherings. The first and largest one was a society. You could become a Methodist in a large society. That would be a few hundred people in your geographic area, probably. Smaller down, though, in order to be part of that society, you had to attend class meeting. And class meeting was what we would call a small group, basically of 10 to 12 people. There was a class leader. There was a whole strategy of raising up people to be part of these small groups and then lead these small groups. And if you weren't part of a class meeting, then you couldn't be part of the larger society of the Methodist. It was expected that you were to go to class meeting where you would be answering questions like, how is it with your soul, and what has tempted you this last week, and how did you meet with that temptation? Did you give in, or were you successful in fending it off? You were to go to class meeting in order to be a Methodist. Now, there was another even smaller group of people that you could become part of, and that was more optional for those who really wanted to go even more, and that was the band meeting. The band meeting was about 3 to 5 people, and that was super stiff accountability for discipleship and growth. Now, wherever Francis Asbury went here in America, he was setting up these groups. In fact, where I'm sitting right now, this church, Hillsboro First United Methodist Church, we were founded by a circuit rider preacher, guy by the name of Peter Cartwright. He visited the local log cabin, and that became the start of this church. And what would have happened is the preacher made a circuit. He would go from place to place to place to offer communion and to preach. And in the wake of where the preacher was traveling, he would leave these little bands of people who were following the Wesleyan way of being disciples in those classes and band meetings. This church is the direct result of the discipleship strategy of John and Charles Wesley and really Francis Asbury, who, by the way, visited Chillicothe nearby plenty of times and actually probably traveled through either here or close to here on his way to Chillicothe, from Chillicothe to Cincinnati. We know that he was in this area through his journals. The difference between Asbury and Whitefield is Asbury followed the Wesleyan strategy of classes and bands, and Whitefield didn't. Adam Clark, a Methodist, early Methodist historian, put it like this: "It was by this means, the formation of societies, that we have been enabled to establish permanent and holy churches over the world. Mr. Wesley saw the necessity of this from the beginning. Mr. Whitefield, when he separated from Mr. Wesley, did not follow it. What was the consequence? The fruit of Mr. Whitefield died with himself. Mr. Wesley's fruit remains, grows, increases, and multiplies exceedingly." And then there's a quote, and by the way, I'm pulling this from a book about banding together by John Wiest. There's a manual that I have for people who want to establish a band meeting or class meeting. And if you want to read a book about that, I have that book. But there's this quote, this very famous quote from George Whitefield near the end of his life, where he said, "My brother Wesley acted wisely. The souls that were awakened under his ministry he joined in class, and thus preserved the fruits of his labor. This I neglected, and my people are a rope of sand." So Wesley was very adamant. He would not send preachers where there wouldn't be follow-up. He didn't want to just have conversions to Jesus Christ and then leave people to fend for themselves. To do that, he said, would be begetting children for the murderer. It would be like having a child and then leaving the child out on the curb to fend for itself. Wesley would not do that, and neither would Francis Asbury. Wherever they went, they established these groups and bands. Now, I would like to say that we're the children, the spiritual inheritors of John Wesley and Francis Asbury. And according to the name on the sign out in front of the church, we're the Methodists. We're the ones who grew from just a few hundred people to 6 million in just 50 years' time. But I wonder if that's accurate. Because in the mid 1800s, the Methodists got away from the classes and bands. And we started to do other things, maybe worthy things, maybe things that we should have been doing all along anyways. But we neglected the classes and bands. We neglected the small groups of accountability. We started to not want to tell one another how we had failed earlier in that week. We started to be too important about, well, I'm not going to share this private stuff out of my life. And so we got away from the secret sauce. And what has been the result? The result is that our church has stagnated and now declined to such a pitiful place. I'm speaking about Methodists in general, not this particular church, but we've declined to such a place that we don't know our left hand from our right hand any longer. We have so many United Methodist churches in particular who have not made disciples, who have not had adult baptisms, who have not had conversions to Jesus Christ in years. And when you start to really get to know and talk to many of the disciples in these United Methodist churches, you find out that their knowledge of the Scriptures is very superficial, that they don't follow the spiritual disciplines that Christians have used for centuries to grow in Jesus Christ, that other priorities and things have, like weeds growing up in the garden, have choked out the life and fruit of the Methodist movement. Our goal here is to rediscover the secret sauce, and not just know it, but to put it into practice. And I'd rather be more like Francis Asbury and John Wesley than George Whitefield. And I hope you would too. If you have any desire in just exploring what it would be like to be part of a band or class, I want to talk to you. I want to have you experiment with one of our existing groups, or maybe even start your own group. The more groups we have, the better. And I would just really love to have that conversation with you. Thank you for joining us for our daily video.